I want to move and talk about, since you mentioned sort of mega cap tech, why the money continues to go there. Nvidia did get its target raised today. The stock's been trading around a new high. But the news today of what the president just referred to in his news conference called a restrictive covenant regarding Nvidia and AMD and these 15%, the pay of China chip sales, the revenue to the U.S. government is really an extraordinary development. Eamon Javers is following that for us, as well as another story today that's been of interest in the news. But let's address this Nvidia and AMD part of it first, because it really is new, almost uncharted territory, is it?
Yeah, it is, Scott. It's a new tax of sorts on American companies who want to get export licenses from the U.S. government. We had a fascinating discussion live in the briefing room by the president. He explained how he came to this deal. He said he was meeting with Jensen Huang here at the White House, and Huang wanted permission from the federal government to sell these chips in China. The president said he asked him for 20% of the revenue, said, if I'm going to do this for you, I need 20%, a strictly, transactional approach to sort of what the federal regulations are here. He said Huang came back to him and said, well, can we make that 15%? And they were willing to cut a deal on that. And so that does raise the question, Scott, of sort of how much these export licenses will cost other companies if that's going to be the U.S. government's approach to sort of any kind of regulatory interaction with companies. If the U.S. government is doing a deal that benefits a company, does that company have to kick back a certain percentage in tax back to the federal treasury? So the president also talked about the reasoning for this and some other chips that he might do deals on in the future, including more high-tech chips. Take a listen to what he said.
The chip that we're talking about, the H20, it's an old chip. China already has it in a different form, different name. Jensen also has a new chip, the Blackwell. Do you know what the Blackwell is? The Blackwell is super duper advanced. I wouldn't make a deal with that, although it's possible I'd make a deal, a somewhat enhanced in a negative way Blackwell. In other words, take 30% to 50% off of it. But that's the latest and the greatest in the world. Nobody has it. They won't have it for 5 years.
So the president there saying he'd be willing to negotiate the release of those higher-end Nvidia chips, although he wants the Blackwell chip to be degraded by 30 to 50% before he'd authorize the sale of that in China. No indication from the president there of what percentage of Nvidia's revenue the federal government should take in exchange for that release. But clearly, this is a new approach by the U.S. government, Scott, that we haven't seen before. And we'll wait and see what other companies might end up looking at this as a template for them to do deals to be allowed to export goods.
That's almost what I feel is the most important takeaway here. It's not about the chip, H fill in the blank. It's about the precedent that this whole thing sets. Stacey Rasgon, who's probably the foremost semiconductor analyst over at Bernstein, raises this issue relative to chips, but he's trying to think bigger picture. What he says feels like a slippery slope to us. Will other companies be required to pay to sell into the region? He asks. I think those are all legitimate questions and concerns.
Yeah, and you look at the president's approach here, Scott, across the board, and it is transactional. The president feels if the U.S. government and himself are going to be involved in any kind of deal, he wants to see some kind of return for the taxpayers. That is, either it's financial or equity. He's done these golden share deals now involving shares in companies that he feels he's been able to benefit. This is a president who views himself very much as a deal maker, and he wants a piece of the action.
The other story that I don't want to get glossed over today because it's of interest given what happened last week, Intel's CEO is going to be at the White House meeting with the president, right, we understand today, and that's after President Trump said he needs to resign immediately. Talk about awkward.
Yeah, it is going to be awkward. We don't have exact timing on when that's going to happen, but you can imagine that the Intel CEO is sitting there with his team over the weekend looking at all these deals that different companies are cutting with the administration, whether that's Apple or Nvidia or whoever. And you say, what do I need to offer this administration to get on the right track? Is it some large number of investment? Is it some percentage of revenue? Is it some equity stake? Can I bring some goodies to the meeting, so to speak, to put on the table? We saw Apple with a deal tchotchke that they presented to the president. He loves those moments, and so you wonder if you're Intel coming into this meeting, what exactly you have to tee up in terms of an offer to the U.S. government.
We'll see, and you'll let us know what happens with that. Eamon, thanks so much. It's Eamon Javers, North Lawn of the White House for us. Weiss, I'll get a quick comment from you on the Nvidia AMD side of things, the idea of it being a slippery slope. Now wondering if you own a company that does stock in a company that does a significant amount of business in China, if there's going to be a toll.
Yeah, look, I've thought about this quite a bit, as I'm sure everybody on the show has. It really depends. If it's look, first of all, these companies, Nvidia in particular, their tax rate is about 14% versus the corporate tax rate of 21%. So I don't care if they pay more. I'd love them to pay more. But if we're doing this as a penalty for doing business elsewhere and for doing it in China and foregoing our security concerns for compensation, they have an issue with it. So I really don't know the answer to that. But otherwise, raise revenue, I've got no problem with it.
Jimmy?
Yeah, I started this morning clutching my pearls when I saw this news, and then I thought about it a little bit further, and I remember I didn't clutch my pearls when the Biden administration, as the CHIPS Act came out, started to enact regulations on that and saying that you have certain hiring quotas, and you have to provide child care and stuff like that. There are benefits that these companies are receiving, and it doesn't matter what administration, there are some attributes that are going to come back to the government for those benefits.
Nvidia, 13% of its business in China, 24% business for AMD. If you think about really what's going on here, they're being charged to acquire an export license, and that's what this is. So for Nvidia, it gets them back in $7 billion, potentially a quarter, $1 billion gets kicked back to the United States. Okay, if you're thinking about what's the effect on the stock, probably not so much, but it does set a precedent. It sets a precedent for other companies that want to do businesses or need to negotiate with the White House, and they have to understand that over the next 3 years, there's going to be a negotiation that's going to have an economic consequence for them.
Apple gets 20% of its revenues from China.
They do.
You got to think about that in any sense.
Okay, and Tim Cook was in the Oval Office
with golden
last week.
gifts.
Yeah,
with golden gifts.
So that's what it's going to be over the next 3 years.